to our coverage of COVID-19. A few moments ago, you saw coverage of what's happening in Botswana. 4 cases of what's called a sublineage of Omicron being discovered there. That variant, we understand, spreading very quickly through the United Kingdom and other countries in Europe. Joined now by Professor Bruce Mellado of the Gauteng Coronavirus Command Council. Here, Professor Mellado is a mathematical modeler. He joins us now. Professor, good afternoon to you. You've told us in the past how important the type of variant is to try to predict what another wave of COVID-19 might look like. At this stage, do we know what a 5th wave variant could actually look like? Is there any indication at all about what we could be facing?
First of all, thanks for having me, and good to hear you again, Stephen. So you're very right. I mean, what we have observed is that this virus is continuously evolving, is continuously changing, and monitoring is paramount. So even though we have relaxed quite a number of restrictions, which is well-founded, scientifically speaking, this does not mean that we should not be monitoring the situation very carefully as we used to. We actually monitor the numbers and all the indexes that come to our community essentially on a daily basis and have several interactions a week to understand what's going on. So from our genomics team, we see that there are basically it's a system that is continuously changing. We have a change in the subvariants that now have become dominant in South Africa. So what we do is we basically carefully study the severity of hospitalizations, number of hospitalizations, the geolocation of hospitalizations, types of hospitalizations, the correlation between community transmission and mortality to ascertain whether we have a significant change in the dynamic of the pandemic. As we do that, so is evolving our modeling. The modeling is evolving continuously, is being updated fairly regularly because we see a slow evolution of the pandemic and we have to keep up with it. And indeed, we do expect a 5th wave and we are doing modeling for it as we speak.
So, I mean, there's been an optimistic view that a new variant may perhaps be more transmissible but lead to less severe symptoms. Is that the assumption you're working on, or are you working on a different assumption?
We avoid making assumptions as much as we can when we have data. So we now have a new subvariant that has become dominant. We do have a lot of data with which we can verify, rule out, or confirm a hypothesis. So far, what you said that the tendency is for the virus to become somewhat more transmissible, but somewhat less virulent, seems to be holding water, at least obviously as far as the data is concerned. What we have seen is that about 2 months ago, we had stabilized around 6,000 to 6,500 cases a week in the province, which is not very high, but it's not low either. That means we're dealing with something highly transmissible that is circulating in the communities, leading to very moderate or small number of hospitalizations, a very small number of mortality. Then there was a drop, and that basically coincided when we went from one subvariant to another. And now we have stabilized again about 3,000 or so cases a week. So we basically monitor the situation very closely and very importantly, in order to see what's going to happen in the weeks to come, what is the correlation between community transmission and hospitalizations and the severity of hospitalization. So far, we haven't seen a very strong change in the past 2 months or so. Overall, because we seem to be dominated, community transmission seems to be dominated by reinfections. What we see for the most part is a relatively low rate of hospitalizations, and within hospitalization, the severity is not very high. So that's something that already became clear in the 4th wave, and we see is a very slow drop in the severity of the cases. Very slowly, but is dropping, is not increasing.
As we have more waves of the disease, do the waves start to, on a graph, look different? To try and explain what I mean, for example, in the first wave, there was no immunity in the population. So the wave would perhaps be able to go up really quite steeply. Anyone who came into contact with the disease would probably be infected, may have some immunity, but not very much. By the time the second wave came along, the virus would come into contact with more people who had immunity. Perhaps it would change its shape. Do you see that as there are different waves, as we have more and more people vaccinated as well, the shape of the wave is different? Perhaps it gets more spread out and flatter, or have I misunderstood it completely?
So, okay, you're asking a very good question. So we have to pay a lot of attention to what happened with the fourth wave. The fourth wave is very, very important for us to understand what the dynamics of the transition to endemicity is in South Africa, in particular in our province. So what we saw during the fourth wave is that because there was already a significant fraction of the population, very high number, a very high fraction of people that have had the virus, in addition to the vaccination, what we saw already in the fourth wave is that we were dominated by reinfection. So reinfections were actually driving most of the numbers. As a result of that, we saw a decorrelation between the number of people infected. So we saw a significant peak, but it wasn't backed up with a lot of hospitalizations and, most importantly, a lot of severe hospitalizations. So it was evident that already the fourth wave signified a change in the overall correlation, the overall dynamic of the pandemic. And we don't expect, unless we see surprises, obviously, we have to monitor the situation very carefully. But the fifth wave will be very different. It's expected to be somewhat smaller for a number of reasons. But all in all, this decorrelation between people getting infected and severe disease will continue to be the case.
Professor Bruce Mellado, thank you. Member of the Gauteng Coronavirus Command Council and a mathematical modeler.